Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Now, former Deputy Finance Minister Mcebisi Jonas believes that there are a number of factors that need to be in place to turn around South Africa's fortunes. According to a World Bank survey of 164 countries, South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. Jonas says factors include economic growth, tackling inequality, and a fundamental rethinking of the electoral system. He believes that a competent state is paramount to this kind of turnaround. The former Deputy Minister was speaking at the third Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation's Drakensberg Inclusive Growth Forum. We'll get more. Newzroom Afrika's Hugo Ribatika is with Mcebisi Jonas and joins us live from Drakensberg to unpack his thoughts. Hugo, a very good evening to you once again. Rethinking pathways to economic growth has been a key theme this evening.
It certainly has. We've had many speakers speak this evening. Mr. Jonas spared no punches, actually, in his very frank conversation, frank discussion. Obviously, running short of time, so he had to make it brief. So we've asked him to speak to us now, and he joins me. Mr. Jonas, thanks much for speaking to us. Now, you spared no punches in your speech this evening, made accusations that, in fact, make the accusations at the government on how administration is running the country into the ground. You also gave us a 5-point plan, and you also talked about foreigners and how they're used as a scapegoat. Let's start maybe with your 5-point plan.
Look, I mean, it's very clear that if we are to turn the country around, we've got to address the issue of growth. And growth, I think, is a function of investment. It is a function of capital allocation. In order to address growth, obviously, I made a couple of suggestions around how we could drive growth, the growth agenda in the country. But the truth of the matter is that with low growth also undermines investment. So it's important that growth is fundamental. It creates jobs. The notion that there's a jobless growth is not a viable notion. I mean, we have the period in 2008, etc., where there was growth and there were jobs in the economy.
You also talked about entrepreneurship. I think that was one of the things you...
Entrepreneurship is fundamental because I think the point is that we've got to ensure that we increase black participation in the economy, not just as employment, but in ownership, in management, etc., etc. That's fundamentally important. And we actually must nurture entrepreneurship. And there are huge programs I know that government is trying to run, but I think the private sector must come in and chip in. The second part is addressing inequality. The levels of inequality in South Africa are unsustainable. It's unsustainable. You cannot have a society as unequal as South Africa and think you're going to have political stability. So my view is that I think we need to be more deliberate. Private sector opening their supply chains. The government doing more in terms of strengthening education and ensuring that poor kids from poor families get good education, and many other measures that you can use around that. Open up access to opportunities for poor kids and youth in South Africa. But we've got to address inequality if we are to create political stability. And of course, the third point I talked about is the electoral reform. We need to have a system that promotes political accountability. We can have many institutions that promote political accountability. If your electoral system doesn't ensure that those that are elected are accountable to constituencies, as opposed to being accountable to political parties and political party barons, you are going to have the problems that we have. And lastly, I think citizens have a role. When we vote, that was my last point, I think people must understand that voting is important. It is central to democracy. Abstaining from voting is probably problematic. We need to vote, and we need to vote with our eyes wide open, as opposed to just voting on the basis of loyalty.
Well, let's talk about, Sunny, some of the issues that you've talked about. You've called out government on their inability to run the government, if you will, as has former President Kgalema Motlanthe. But you were both in government. How is it that government does not see these challenges that are so plain to you?
Look, I mean, it's everybody, everywhere you go in the world, I mean, people will tell you the state, a stronger state, efficient and effective state, is fundamental to democracy. because social protection comes to the state, education, public safety, etc. All of those things depend on an efficient, well-functioning state. Of course, let's face it, in the last couple of years, the state capacity has been eroded. We've appointed people into positions merely because they were supposed to be extension for state capture and corruption. My view is that I think we have not done enough at the moment to try to turn that around. And it's a very obvious thing. By the way, it's not an easy thing. I must tell you now up front. It's a difficult thing. If you talk to many professionals, they will rather choose a private sector as opposed to coming to government. So part of the initiative should be to make the environment in the public sector more attractive for black professionals and for professionals in general. There has to end also separate politics from bureaucracy. And the process of that is through processes of appointment, create independent public service commissions, purely independent in the sense that they look at professional capability and meritocratic appointment as opposed to appointing on the basis of politics.
And finally, Mr. Jonas, you talked about accountability or the lack thereof in government. Now, using foreigners as a scapegoat would potentially be one such area.
Look, I mean, it's a common phenomenon that whenever people are in trouble or populists are in trouble, they always look at, firstly they claim to be victims themselves, but also they look at other scapegoats. I mean, in general, foreigners become easy scapegoats. In many other countries, they would say certain ethnic groups are scapegoats, etc. The reality of the matter, you must build an equitable society. That's the aim. I mean, build society, make opportunities available, create a capacity of your youth to be employable, train the youth, etc. Open up opportunities. We cannot avoid the fact that South Africa is attractive to skills from outside South Africa, and in fact we should welcome skills from outside South Africa. And we operate in every part of the continent ourselves, and we are welcome. And the Pan-African agenda is important to be promoted. So all what I'm saying is that you cannot use the Constitution, because it's important. Institutions are important. You cannot blame the Constitution, you cannot blame the institutions when you are not delivering. Delivery and execution depends on an efficient and effective government and good politics.
Mr. Jonas, appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Mcebisi Jonas, the former Finance Deputy Minister, speaking to us and obviously talking to us, Paul, about Pan-Africanism and how absolutely critical it is to the functioning of a country. The scapegoats that government seems to be pulling out in some of those instances, and the need to reduce the levels of inequality in South Africa, which is currently ranked 164th, and that's the bottom of the barrel. And Paul, back to you.
Very well, Hugo, Ribatika. Let's leave it there for now. Some interesting discussions coming out of that forum.